Hello everyone, welcome to episode 25 of the MEE-FIT podcast, and we're going about it a little bit differently today. It's going to be a solo episode. It's just going to be myself talking to the camera. We've not done this style of podcast episode before, so we'll see how it goes. So in today's episode, I'm going to be discussing a new kind of public health framework, I suppose, which is called Health at Every Size. Now this presentation is something that I delivered at a recent client event here at MEE-FIT. So every 3 months, we run what we call our MEE-FIT Summit, which is a day where clients come together and we as a team share education, information about health, fitness, nutrition, training. We also do a bit of goal setting, reflection, just kind of, it's a cool event. It gets our members together, gets them kind of chatting with each other, chatting with the team, and just provides a framework for people to then move forward with their goals over the next few months. And at the last summit, I presented this presentation, which I'm going to re-deliver today as the podcast. And it is on a topic which I think a lot of people found a little bit challenging. It was something that goes against what you typically believe or what you've typically heard around the relationship between health and weight specifically. So I'm going to dive into that and going to kind of share with you the content of that presentation. And at the end of it, if anyone's got any questions, anything they'd like to talk about, or any kind of comments on it, I'd love to hear from anyone who's listened. So I'm going to dive in. Health at every size. So to set the scene with this a little bit, just prior to the summit, I shared a few posts on our Instagram stories just to gain a bit of perspective of what people thought about this topic. And for anyone who's kind of listening to this, have a bit of a think about this yourself. So the first question was, do you believe being overweight or obese is unhealthy? And the overwhelming response to that, 93% of people who voted on this poll said yes, which I think is pretty typical and what I would have expected to see. The next question was, do you believe someone who is overweight or obese would be healthier if they lost weight? So no other context to that question, no other nuance, but just a very simple question. And 100% of people who voted answered yes, which again, I've got no surprise in that. I fully expected that to be the case. The last one did surprise me a little bit. Do you believe it's healthier to be fat and fit or thin and unfit? Now, just to be clear, I don't like those terminologies, but I just thought I'm going to write it in the most simplistic way possible. And it surprised me, this one actually. 93% of people said fat and fit was healthier, thin and unfit was unhealthy. And it surprised me in a really positive way, actually, because I didn't think people would believe that. I thought it might be a little bit more of an even spread, but the fact that most people believe that, I thought was really, really positive. So just a quick clarification for everyone on the podcast, and I delivered this on the day at the summit. Like, me sharing this information with you all does not mean that I, as an individual, or my business, MEE-FIT, and my team of coaches are anti-weight loss, okay? This isn't me saying that I don't believe people should strive towards weight loss, or weight loss isn't a realistic goal or a feasible goal or an appropriate goal for people. Sort of some that are there. Weight loss can still be a very valid and suitable goal. You might want to lose weight to feel more confident in your clothes, to fit better in your clothes. We know that's a really big driving factor for so many clients who make a start with us, is they want to feel that they can fit into their maybe summer, we're in a lovely day today, their summer outfits better, or their general outfits better, or that they've got a wardrobe full of clothes they can no longer fit into. That's something we hear all the time. So, you might want to lose weight for those purposes. You might want to lose weight for performance related, improvement. So for a lot of clients here, they want to improve things like chin-ups, press-ups. The quickest way to do that for a lot of clients, a lot of people, is actually weight loss. Run-in performance potentially might improve, with less weight. Taking pressure off joints, we know that can be a contributing factor towards osteoarthritis. So I don't think that people should never try to lose weight. I just want to be really, really clear on that before I get stuck in. What I want to do with this podcast episode is provide anyone who's listening with the wider perspective of what the science actually says between the relationship between health and weight. And I think that what I'm hopefully going to share with you is definitely not as clear cut as we previously were led to believe. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time with this on the presentation. I'm not going to do it here, but I just wanted to kind of provide this because for me as a person, I'm very science-based. I've done a degree, master's degree, so I've always been grounded in sort of basing our advice here as a team on appropriate scientific research and ensuring that the information that we give to clients is backed by high-quality science where possible. And I just shared this as a kind of table, and this shows what we call a hierarchy of evidence. And I think the reason I shared this is that a lot of the understanding we have about the relationship between health and weight doesn't come from higher quality sources of information, it typically comes from stuff more so in the middle. So cross-sectional studies, surveys, really what we call epidemiology. So whereby, the research looks at a wide proportion of the population, what they do or don't do, and then what their health looks like. In this example, we're looking at health. So they've taken a wide view of people, looked at people's BMI, let's say, for example, across the course of a wide group of people, a wide population, whether that's a town or a city or a country even, and then looked at the health outcomes. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't explain whether there's any cause or effect to that. It only shows a correlation. So epidemiology studies, they show correlation. So as one thing increases, another thing increases, or as one thing increases, another thing decreases. Those things might be correlated with each other, but we can't prove a cause and effect. And if you go onto Google and you search sort of funny correlations, for example, you will find some web pages or Facebook or whatever that shows you some weird and wonderful correlations, which I think highlight this example. So one that's always stuck in my head, I can't remember why I first read this one, but for a period of time, maybe mid to late 2000s, there was a very strong correlation across maybe a 10-year period between the number of films that Nicolas Cage had starred in, the actor Nicolas Cage, and the number of people who had died by drowning. I think it was in the US. So those two things, which are completely irrelevant to each other, actor Nicolas Cage, number of movies, number of people who drowned within a calendar year, clearly those two things are no way related to each other, yet they strongly correlated with each other. So if you looked at it over a period of time, the line tracked very closely together. So someone could try and make an argument that those two things are related to each other when clearly they are not, okay? And that is just an example of what I'm referring to. Correlation does not equal causation, and that's quite a commonly kind of discussed principle within the scientific community, because two things might be very strongly correlated with each other, but it's a very different conversation as to whether those things are caused by one another. And that's what I wanted to highlight here, is that the risk of bias and the quality of evidence with these types of studies is a lot lower. Now, that's not to say they're not important, they're not relevant, they absolutely are, and that's how often theories are produced, is we look at a wide portion of people, what they do or don't do, what attributes they have, what characteristics they have, what BMI they have in this example, and look at the health outcomes. And that's where the scientific process often starts. We then make theories off the back of that and then try and test that in a more specific manner, which is when the things higher up the hierarchy come in, things like randomized control trials, systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Now, just very quickly on those, that is where we then start to really understand what is actually happening. Is one thing causing another thing? And that's where those types of studies come in. So I don't want to dive into that too much, but I just wanted to highlight that to our audience and to anyone who's listening today, because what I'm going to talk about later, a lot of the information is coming from the top end of this hierarchy, and whereas the initial thought process, the initial belief around this whole weight and health conversation probably stemmed a lot from things more in the middle of this hierarchy, the epidemiology type studies, which are not as high quality and don't show the cause and effect that the later studies then did. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to talk a little bit about the obesity epidemic. Okay, so just some quick stats on obesity. Now I'm going to whiz over these really, really quickly, because this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. But obesity rates have risen from 13% in the early 60s to over 40% in 2017. That's US data. So a threefold increase in a matter of sort of 60 years. In the UK, as of 2022, 28% of people were obese and 36% of people were overweight. Worldwide statistics, 1/8 of people are now living with obesity across the entire world, and it's predicted that half of the world will be obese by 2050, so in 25 years' time. Now, I did just put a little caveat to that weight loss injections may change this. Interestingly, in the US, I know there's been a plateau on the obesity rates climbing. That's kind of plateaued a little bit, which hasn't happened for a long, long time, and they do believe that weight loss medications such as Ozempic, Wegovy, etc., are contributing to that with the sheer number of people who are taking those types of medications in America. So they might have something to say about this, but prior to those being more prevalent and used by a large group of people, the prediction was that half of the world would be obese by 2050. Now, what's driving this? Again, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about this because this will probably be pretty clear to most people, but over the last, say, 50 or 60 years, there's been a pretty big change to our lifestyle, to the way that we live, to the food we have available to us, the lifestyles that we all live, technological advancements, etc. And I just put a little bit of that here on this slide. So, changes to food environment. Of course, there's been increased availability of processed food, supermarkets, fast food chains, etc., larger portion sizes, marketing and advertising. Obviously, we're preyed on a lot by these companies in terms of television adverts, magazine adverts, social media adverts, just billboards, etc., there's a lot of money that goes into making money off food production and food consumption. And there's also been big shifts in our physical activity rate. So obviously, over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there's been big changes in technology in terms of things that we do in the household, dishwashers, washing machines, etc. Also things that we do in our jobs. A lot more people are more sedentary now. They do a lot more computer-based work. So there's obviously been some big changes in that as well. Now, I kind of said, what posed the question, what's working to stop this? What's working? What's having an effect on the obesity? And up until recently, and I say recently because of the weight loss injections that I mentioned earlier, nothing was really working, But despite that, it's not as if we've all stopped trying. It's not as if the whole population has thought, do you know what? We're just all going to get overweight and obese now. There's nothing we can do about it, so we're just going to give up, okay? Half of the US population have reported a weight loss attempt within the last 12 months, and that was taken from a survey that I found. So half of the US population, adult population, had tried to lose weight in the last 12 months. So it's clearly something that people are still trying to do. It's clearly still something that people are trying to do. Billions is spent globally on obesity prevention, governments and, worldwide. Money is spent by countries, continents to try and sort of solve this problem. Government legislation's brought in, it's a big topic of conversation, yet nothing has been working. And I think one thing that I've certainly come around to the idea of over the last few years, and I've read more about, and people I follow on social media and doctors I follow, etc. I've been speaking more about this and viewing obesity as a disease. And I pose the question, is obesity a disease? Now, people may have different perspectives on that. People have different opinions on this. Some people view, people who are overweight, there's still a stigma, I think, attached to that people will view someone who's overweight and is obese, they'll view them as lazy, they'll view them as gluttonous, they'll say that they just can't control themselves, they need to exercise more regularly, they need to look after themselves better, etc., as if it's purely a choice. It's a choice to be overweight, it's a choice to be obese. Now, I think the research disagrees with that. I think that the overwhelming research that we have and current kind of consensus, I believe, based on multiple kind of health organizations across the world is that, yes, in short, obesity is a disease. And the reason that I believe that is that obesity is a very complicated, multifaceted problem. There is not one single cause of obesity. There's not one single reason that people do or don't end up obese. It has lots of different factors, lifestyle factors, environmental factors, genetical factors, medical factors. There's so many things that can influence someone's likelihood of being overweight and obese. And I think it goes beyond just choices. I think choices play a role. I don't disagree with that, but it's certainly easier for some people to make positive choices than it is to others. And I always look deeper. I try and think, well, why are people making those choices? Is there a reason they are making those choices? Is there something going on internally within their body that leads them to make poor decisions? Because I don't think people who are overweight or obese necessarily, they know the decisions they're making are not good ones. It's not like people can sit and overindulge on things and do all the things that have contributed to their overweight and obesity and think that they're doing the right thing or that they're making a positive decision. But there's a reason as to why they make those decisions, and I'm not going to delve into that. And I want to just be clear here, this is not my area of expertise. I provided this very much as an overview of this information to provide a slightly different perspective to our client base. So I'm not trying to make out that I'm any form of obesity specialist, but I do believe, based on the research that I've read, that obesity is a disease, and it should be treated as such, and it should be respected as, to people who suffer with it, shouldn't be viewed as gluttonous and lazy and and anything like that, they should be treated with care and compassion and respect. So on the last slide, there was a conversation around genetics, and I mentioned genetics. Now, I just wanted to provide a little insight into that as to what the genetic side of this might potentially look like. Like, again, I just want to clarify, this is not my main area of expertise, but upon reading the research, what I kind of come across was that the best available evidence that we have shows us that genetics accounts for between 40 and 50% of the variability in someone's body weight. So a pretty big proportion of the weight that you are right now, or the weight that most people are, nearly half of it, or potentially half of it, is driven by genetics. So your genetics is determining a pretty large proportion of your body weight. And again, this is shown to be much higher in people with obesity. So 60 to 80% of the weight that someone is driven by their genetics for those who are overweight and obese. So no matter the lifestyle decisions you make, no matter the choices you make, the best will in the world, you've still only got a 20 to 40% influence on your body weight if you're someone who suffers with obesity. So that's a pretty small amount of impact you can have by making positive choices and doing positive things with your lifestyle. And again, not my complete area of expertise, but I read that there's been 15 genes within each person that have been implicated in contributing to obesity, and they mostly seem to impact the hormone leptin. So leptin and ghrelin are hunger hormones, so they are the two hormones that tell our body as to whether we're full or not full, in need of food or not in need of food. And again, these things are very, very complicated. These are not my area of expertise, but I know that dysregulation of these hormones, leptin and ghrelin, is one of the biggest reasons why so many people are driven to consume a lot more calories than others, and obviously play a big role in someone becoming overweight and obese. And this might be something that you can't impact. This might be something that's within you that you can't change, or you can't have any major effect on. So it's sort of setting you up for a difficult battle with your weight, potentially, of some of these hormones and some of these genes are impacted in yourself. So I just then provided some information on the data on long-term weight loss. And I think what's really interesting with this is that there's very little data on long-term weight loss without surgery. And when I say long-term, I'm referring sort of 5 to 10 years plus, in terms of how many people actually lose weight and maintain that weight loss over a 5 to 10 year period. And there's absolutely no data on that, other than with surgery. With bariatric surgery, weight loss surgery, there is some data, but on just general lifestyle intervention, there isn't. And it's understandable why, monitoring people over a 5 to 10 year period from a weight loss intervention that was delivered over a 6 or 10 or 20 week period of time is going to be extremely difficult. So, what most weight loss intervention studies do is they provide a weight loss intervention that might last 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. And then they monitor those participants over the course of the next few years and see what happened to their weight and whether they sustain that weight loss. So some studies look at it more acutely, like what happens to someone's weight if we give them this diet or a control diet. And they look at it over a 20-week period. And then what some other studies do is they then obviously track those participants over a longer time frame to see what happened to them later down the line. And most of the studies that do that are only across a 2 to 3 year period, because for obvious reasons, like trying to track someone who's had a weight loss intervention 2 years ago, 3 years ago, try and keep on top of them for another 2 to 7, 8 years plus is going to be really, really difficult to do. Very, very time consuming, very, very expensive. So very, very little data is available on that longer term. But the kind of best data we have at this point, I would say, a meta-analysis from 2019 took 31 different studies, 31 different trials, brought them all together, which is what a meta-analysis does, is it collates data and provides a wider perspective of the overall research. 20,000 participants in total across the 31 studies. The average weight loss at 1 year was 3.6 kilo, and the average weight loss at 3 years was 2.45. So you can see that the average person, after 2 years after the initial check-in at year 1, had regained some of the weight. Now, I think it's important to remember with research that they always look at averages. Average reported in group A, average in group B, but within each average, there'll always be a big variation. So it's not as clear cut as it maybe seems, because there'll always be outliers to the rule, and there'll always be people who achieved very different to the average. But obviously, for the purpose of this, the averages were that. And the average was less than 5% weight loss. Now, they use 5% as I don't know who came up with this or what this is based on, but the 5% weight loss is viewed as a sort of clinically significant amount of weight to lose, and the average at 1 year and 3 year was less than that. So the average person across these studies that we've got available to us was losing less than 5% of their body weight. So not overly great. You know, you're not looking at that and thinking we're great at losing weight. And if we think about it, like, the reason that obesity rates have continued to rise is that none of us can lose weight effectively. Like, as a population, we struggle to lose weight and maintain it, and we typically see that people will go through cycles, and we'll talk about that shortly. So this then brings us on to the topic of weight loss and health. So the previous part of that, I suppose, was just setting the scene a little bit in terms of what's going on with people's body weight, what's the trends over time, how effective are we at losing weight? The answer is very poor. But then we got into the main part of this, really, which is weight loss and health, and what does the relationship of that between those things look like? Now, I posed that question earlier: is being overweight and obese unhealthy? Now, the common perception about that, and what we saw from that Instagram poll earlier, is that, yeah, the view is that being overweight is bad for our health. You know, if you ask most people, they will believe that being overweight is bad for your health. But what's really interesting to this, and this, just to be clear with anyone who's watching, like, this has challenged me a lot, because a lot of this that I've been reading about, a lot of this research I've been studying, challenged me a lot, because it went against my preconceived ideas around this, and I think that's always really difficult. But it's really interesting, I think, that, yeah, the evidence for this is really, really mixed. You know, it's not like there's a very consistent demonstration within the research that a higher BMI leads to poorer health outcomes and risk of disease. So it says here, BMI has not been consistently shown to correlate with all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality is basically risk of death from any means. So it's a pretty good metric of health, really. You know, if you've got a much higher risk of all-cause mortality, that's not a good thing. It means you're more likely to die from something sooner than you would have been if your all-cause mortality risk was lower. So yeah, not a good thing. So yeah, BMI has not been consistently linked with that. We do not see in every study that's done, in every review of those studies, we don't see a consistent answer as to whether increased BMI, you know, is risk with poorer health outcomes. What we do see, though, is we do see an increase of all-cause mortality risk at both ends of the BMI spectrum. And I think that's really important here, that we're not talking about statistical extremes. You know, if someone is morbidly obese, you know, you see these people who, you know, the television examples of people who can't leave their house, they can't leave their bed, you know, they can't really walk, all of that. Like, that's not really what we're talking about here. Neither are we talking about people who are extremely thin on the complete other end of the BMI spectrum, in that they are, you know, completely malnourished. Like, clearly those two things are very bad for us. I suppose what this is more referring to is everything that's more in the middle of those things, not statistical extremes. So this was a quote from a study that you can see below, and I can share the studies with anyone who's interested in seeing where I've got this information from. I'm just going to read this. So, while it is well established that obesity is associated with increased risk for many diseases, causation is less well established. So that goes back to the conversation we had before. You know, correlation or association is not the same as causation. We cannot know for certain whether the overweight or the obesity or the higher BMI cause those issues. Epidemiological studies rarely acknowledge factors like fitness, activity, nutrient intake, weight cycling, or socioeconomic status when considering connections between weight and disease, yet all play a role in determining health. So what that's saying is that studies that have been done that have looked at people's BMI across a wide portion of people, population level, looked at the health risk, some of them may show an increased health risk, some of them don't, but for those that do, it's impossible to know whether it's just purely the weight or whether those two things are just correlated with each other. You know, because like it says, they don't take into consideration things like fitness, activity level, quality of diet, weight cycling, which, like I said, we've got some slides on shortly. So yeah, it's impossible to know just from those studies alone. So the question that I suppose I pose to anyone who believes weight is poor for our health or being overweight is a risk for our health, the question I would pose to them is it the obesity which causes the potential health risk? Or are there other factors? Are there other things going on? Behaviors, you know, is it the behaviors that we have when we are overweight and obese that leads to the poorer health outcomes rather than the obesity itself? So one thing I wanted to highlight here was weight cycling, okay? So weight cycling is the repeated process of weight loss followed by weight regain, which when I was talking about this in the room here at MEE-FIT, when I was delivering this presentation, there was a lot of nodding heads when we talked about this, because I think most people have experienced this throughout their life, whereby they've gone on a diet, they've lost a stone, but they've regained it back. Or they've gone on another diet, lost half a stone, regained it back. And that's the process that we're talking about weight cycling. Now, we're not just talking here, I want to be clear, this isn't just talking about yo-yo dieting. This isn't just talking about fad dieting, whereby people lose weight really quickly through quite unsustainable methods, shake diets, etc. This could be anything. This could be any process of losing weight, whether that's a short-term process or a long-term process. But it's the repeated process of going lighter and heavier, lighter and heavier. And what I now know, having read more research on this, is that weight cycling increases a lot of sort of things within the body that we don't want increasing. Things like inflammation, hypertension, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia. So it has a very negative effect on our overall health and well-being. And weight cycling alone has been shown to increase the risk of all-cause mortality by around 40%. So quite a big increase in all-cause mortality just from weight cycling alone. And it's another issue with weight cycling is that it's associated with what they call sarcopenic obesity, which is basically that when people lose weight, especially if they lose weight quickly, they're more likely to lose muscle mass, okay? So the quicker you lose weight, the more likely you are to dig into your muscle reserves to utilize that energy and break down that muscle tissue. And then what often happens is when people regain that weight back, so let's say someone's gone through a weight cycle, they've lost a stone, they've regained that stone. What's likely happened is as they've lost weight, a couple of pounds of that stone will probably be muscle. And then when they regain it, it's probably all going to be fat or mostly fat. So not only have you been through a weight cycle and maybe you've done well and then just ended up back where you were, but you might have lost muscle mass in that time. So each time you do that weight cycle, you've got less and less muscle each time, and therefore more and more body fat. That's what they call sarcopenic obesity. So not a good thing to happen, which again further increases the risk of all-cause mortality by 24%, because muscle is a really, really important tissue. It's an important tissue for keeping us strong. It's an important tissue for keeping us maintaining our posture and our positioning. It's also an important thing for things like blood glucose regulation, blood sugar regulation. So it's a very, very important tissue, and one that we don't want to lose. So what this group of researchers stated in 2010 was the association between weight and health risk can be better attributed to weight cycling than to adiposity itself, so body fat itself, or being overweight and obese. Now that's a really quite a bold statement, and I don't know whether there's been much disagreement with that or what the kind of current consensus is on that, but I found that really, really interesting. So basically what they're saying there is that if there is a health issue associated with being overweight and obese, it's more likely coming from the repeated bouts of weight cycling than it actually is of just being that body weight alone. So let's say someone enters adult life, becomes obese, early 20s, 30s, whatever, doesn't really matter the age, but they stay there, they don't weight cycle. They're basically saying that person's potentially at no more risk of illness or disease than someone who isn't overweight. But if that same person has been through multiple weight cycle attempts, so they've attempted to lose weight and regained it repetitively throughout their life, that they then increase their health risk because of the weight cycling. That's basically what those researchers were saying, which I found really, really interesting. I don't think there's any specific studies on that as such, so I don't know if we know that for certainty, but it's certainly an interesting perspective. Now, another question is, how beneficial is weight loss on health? Now, we asked that as one of our polls, and again, the answers were pretty unanimous, and I think the public perception of this would be pretty unanimous, that weight loss is a beneficial thing on people's health. So many people come to us here at MEE-FIT with wanting to lose weight to improve their health. Now, I said on the day when I presented this wasn't a very good thing for us to present as a gym, really, because it kind of potentially impacts people wanting to be here with us. But I do pull everyone back into the reasons behind exercise, I promise. But based on the evidence that we have to this question, it's not overly effective to lose weight on our health, okay? Now, this is where it really starts to challenge people a little bit. But the most recent meta-analysis that we have did not show a statistically significant reduction in all-cause mortality with intentional weight loss. So it didn't show that intentional weight loss led to improved health outcomes or risk of all-cause mortality. And this study that was produced in 2021, the authors said, overall, data from observational studies and randomized control trials do not consistently show that intentional weight loss is associated with reduced mortality risk. Even in those studies that demonstrate a benefit of weight loss, it is not clear whether the weight loss itself was the primary factor that reduced the mortality risk. So what it's saying is that the consensus amongst the research is not consistent. It doesn't consistently show that if people lose weight, they have a reduced risk of disease and all-cause mortality. And even in the studies that do show it, because some do and some don't, and that's important here, it's not like every single study shows the same thing. Some of the studies that are done, some of the reviews that are done show there is an increased benefit in losing weight, some show there isn't, so it's not completely clear. But what this is saying is even in those studies that do show a benefit, they can't know for certain whether it's the weight loss alone that caused the health improvements or whether it was other factors. And again, they followed up with, this is because the randomized control trials included in the weight loss meta-analysis invariably incorporated changes in diet and exercise. So what that's saying is those studies that do show a benefit, the reasons that people lost that weight were because they changed their diet and they changed their activity level and their exercise regime. Now, the question is again, is it the weight loss itself that causes the improved health in the studies that have shown that, or is it just because of the diet and the exercise? So this is where the benefits of exercise come back into the fold. So I promise I'm not trying to discourage exercise here by any means. So exercise and health markers. Increased physical fitness leads to improvements in blood pressure, glycemic control, blood lipids, heart function, ectopic fat levels, so the fat levels within our internal organs. And this is irrespective of weight loss. So even if people do not lose weight and they improve their physical fitness, they will improve many of those things, whether they lose weight or not. And there was a really, really interesting study. I can't remember the authors of this off the top of my head. It was number 9 on my references list, but I can't remember the authors off the top of my head. But they included 20 studies in this review, basically. Because what they did in this study is they incorporated not only the BMI and the mortality, the risk of all-cause mortality, but they also incorporated cardiovascular fitness into this. So there was 20 studies involved, over 400,000 observations, and they basically looked at, like I said, the relationship between cardiovascular fitness, BMI, and all-cause mortality. And what this study shows, our findings demonstrate that individuals with higher CRF, which was cardiorespiratory fitness, so individuals with higher cardiorespiratory fitness who are overweight or obese are not at a higher risk of all-cause mortality or cardiovascular disease when compared with normal weight fit individuals. Importantly, individuals who are unfit had a 2-fold increase in the risk of all-cause mortality and a 2 to 3-fold increase in the risk of cardiovascular disease. So what they were saying with those two sort of statements is that in their study of over 400,000 or nearly 400,000 observations across 20 studies, they didn't see an increased risk of all-cause mortality just from being overweight alone when cardiovascular fitness was incorporated. And those people who were overweight on the BMI scale, but they were fit, cardiorespiratory fit, they didn't have an increased risk of disease and all-cause mortality as those who were, of a normal weight, in inverted commas, and fit. So that just showed how protective it is to be fit. And what they said here is cardiorespiratory fitness-centric approach to treating obesity-related health conditions in which the major focus is on increasing physical activity to improve cardiorespiratory fitness rather than a specific weight loss target may improve health outcomes while avoiding pitfalls associated with repeated weight loss attempts. So what they were saying there is that their belief, based on their study, is that the approach to treating obesity-related health conditions is to forget the weight and just focus on the healthy behaviors. So focus on improving cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular strength, flexibility, etc. And doing those things regardless of what happens to weight. And their belief is that that will help to deal with the challenges associated with being overweight and obese, because their belief is that it's not the overweight and obesity itself that's causing the problem, it's the decisions and the behaviors that have led to that point, such as lack of exercise, such as poor nutrition, such as poor stress, poor sleep, etc., etc. So they did say here, and I want to be clear again, I said this at the start, we do not think weight loss attempts should be discouraged, but recognise that this may not be a feasible goal in all adults. So I think that's really, really important to highlight. I don't think many people, there might be some who go very, very into this health at every size kind of framework, which I'll talk about in a second, that flat out categorically do not believe people should try and lose weight. I am not of that mindset, and I don't think these researchers here are of that mindset. Clearly they're not, because they make this statement. Because I still think there is feasible reasons to attempt to lose weight for people, but I don't think improvement of health is one of those, in my opinion. So where does health at every size come in? Just to summarize this, guys. So basically, health at every size is a public health framework which is focusing basically on improving healthy habits and behaviors regardless of body weight changes. It's trying to take body weight away from being the main focus of a health intervention and making it more about cardiorespiratory fitness and overall kind of health improvements, lifestyle improvements. There is other aspects to this framework which I'm not going to dive into now. There's more aspects to it. So, encouraging people to exercise for health, not weight loss. We've kind of spoke about that one. Eating for well-being, again, not talked about that massively, but again, they're trying to take the emphasis off dieting and in a focus of losing weight and just eating in a way that is beneficial. So including, a wide variety of different food choices, eating a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, eating, a wide range of dairy products, grains, etc. Like eating a well-balanced diet, basically, and not focusing solely on the weight and trying to lose weight. And then there's also a part of this which is more about weight inclusivity, reduce weight stigma. I'm not going to delve into that because, again, that's not an area of expertise of mine. It's not something I looked at in any major detail. But from my brief reading of this, there certainly is, and I know about this anyway, just from talking with people, but there's certainly a weight stigma. There's certainly, people who feel discriminated against because of their weight. There's a lot of issues around medical interventions for people who are overweight and obese that maybe aren't backed by any real science or data. So there's loads of areas to this that, again, I'm not going to dive into because it's not my kind of focus here, but I just wanted to provide the wider context. So I suppose this little diagram here, which was from that 2021 study, the references I can share with anyone, but basically they kind of created this diagram, which I think was really, really beneficial. So what it showed is that if we think about obesity treatment, if we think about trying to treat the issues associated with obesity, when we take a weight-centric approach, what seemingly has happened over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years plus is that people are attempting to lose weight. They're mostly then regaining that weight, and it's leading to a repetitive cycle, and people are not getting the health benefits. And if anything, based on the weight cycling we talked about earlier, their health is actually worsening, because of that issue. However, what they suggested is if we take more of a weight neutral approach, in that we increase physical fitness, we increase activity, we increase the quality of our diet. I added in a few bits for our members here, like improve their sleep, improve their stress management, etc. Their body weight may or may not change. It might go up, it might go down, it might stay the same, but we're still going to get health benefits associated with that. And I think the research I presented here makes a very, very strong argument that that is the case. So this was just a table from one of the studies, basically the rationale for a weight neutral strategy. So it basically said that 40-year trends in prevalence of obesity and weight loss indicate that weight-centric approach hasn't been working. The weight-focused approach to this issue hasn't been working over the last 40 years, so maybe a slightly different approach is needed. What the studies have shown, we presented this today, physical activity and cardiorespiratory fitness attenuate the associations, if it is there, between BMI and mortality. And then, again, third one down, increases in physical activity and cardiorespiratory fitness are associated with greater reductions in mortality risk than intentional weight loss. So if someone asked me the question, Dan, how do I get healthier? Do I get fitter or do I lose weight? My absolute 100% answer would be improve your fitness. Now, people can question on that. Let's have a debate if anyone wants to. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts, but that's what I understand the research shows us. Regular exercise improves cardiometabolic health independent of weight loss. We spoke about that. Regular exercise improves major markers of cardiometabolic health. We talked about that. Exercise improves the fitness of adipose tissue, which may contribute to the lower mortality risk associated with the FIT MHO phenotype. Now, we haven't spoken about that massively, and again, it's not my area of expertise, but my understanding of this is that if you are fitter, your body fat is better. It's not as detrimental to you if it's fitter. And exactly how that works, I don't know. I'd have to delve into that a little bit more. But anyway, I'm not going to go over all this, but this was basically a table which highlighted the reasons why these group of researchers suggested that a more physical activity focused approach to managing obesity was potentially more beneficial than the weight strategy that's been going on previously. Now, just a quick one on healthy behaviors. Obviously we spoke about this already, but regular exercise, including strength and cardiovascular training, nutrient dense foods, managing stress, managing sleep and duration of sleep, which is obviously a challenge to a lot of people. Young children, stress, etc., all impact sleep. So I know these things are easier said than done, but I suppose the overall message here is that we should focus on improving those things to improve our health, irrespective of weight loss. So our message, summarize really my thoughts on this, and I'm going to recap a little bit. Weight loss is certainly a valid goal. It can be for a lot of people and should be for a lot of people. However, please do not stop your healthy behaviors if weight loss plateaus or regresses. If you are someone who has decided you want to improve upon your health and you do that through weight loss and you do all these things that lead to the weight loss, such as exercise, nutrition, if the weight loss plateaus, or maybe if you don't lose the weight that you hope to, please know that your health is probably still, well, I'm not going to say probably, it's definitely still better for it. So I really want this to challenge anyone's perspectives on this as to whether they think that if they're not losing weight, they're not improving their health, because I do not think the research kind of backs that up by any means. And yeah, we spoke about this. The health benefits associated with healthy habits go way, way beyond the number on the scale. And it's really, really important to be aware of that. There's my list of references. That is the end of my presentation and therefore the end of the podcast. So yeah, a little bit of a different one here today. If anyone has listened to this, thank you. And if anyone's got any thoughts, comments, opinions, be sure to share them with us. Comment on the YouTube or comment on our social media share of this podcast, because I'd love to get some discussion going. But I hope that's been beneficial. I hope that's been helpful. And yeah, I think for me, it sort of challenges a few of my own biases. And I think it's important to do that. I think it's important to challenge our preconceived ideas, especially when they've maybe been based on something that isn't as clear cut as maybe what we were led to believe. So yeah, I'm going to stop rambling there, guys, because I could continue talking about this, but I hope I've put myself across well. So yeah, thank you all very much for listening. This was episode 25 of the MEE-FIT podcast. Be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're using to access our podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and I will see you all soon.